Ukraine has been for now several years under quite strong, aggressive pressure from Russian Federation, from the annexation of Crimea to the military conflict in parts of Donbass. Resilience is the capacity of the system to withstand shocks, at the same time preserving its key features, but also to bounce back from the shock stronger and perhaps using crisis as an opportunity. Resilient systems, they share key criteria in the way they operate. They are adaptive, so they know how to change under circumstances of crisis. They are also aware of their vulnerabilities. They understand the risks and they've learned from that. They are integrated in a way that different parts of the system can cooperate. Finally, they are self-regulating, and that means that they could respond to crisis and they could adapt at the same time while performing the function.
Russia has generally three understood levers of influence against Ukraine. The first one is the ongoing armed conflict. The second one is the persistence of corruption and vested interest in Ukraine. And the third one is the poor quality of political sphere in Ukraine. Russia's strategic goals have not changed since the onset of the war in 2014. They are understood as mainly trying to keep Ukraine down, low, isolated, and away as much as possible from Euro-Atlantic structures.
Ukraine has demonstrated over the years several resilience criteria and managed to persevere regardless of very strong adversary. But unfortunately, Zelensky's administration is not using this approach to a full degree. On one hand, we don't see a very strong diversity and cooperation of different voices around the table that are designing answers. Secondly, cooperation between central authorities and Ukraine's regions is suffering. Ukrainian institutions are weak, so they cannot regroup and mobilize resources when it's needed for different purposes. What is quite strong in Ukraine and where a lot of resilience comes is private sector, non-state actors, civil society that we've seen during COVID times came together to solve the problem. Similarly, in the paper we are showcasing 4 cases of different civic initiatives that strengthen Ukrainian resilience, from media to museum work to local newspaper, and also Volunteer 100, which is helping address issues of veterans of the war in the East.
The impact of the armed conflict in Ukraine is tremendous, and the ramifications of military operations in Donbass reverberate very strongly in Ukrainian society. First, the conflict is complicating the consolidation of democracy and the pace of reforms in Ukraine. Second, the armed conflict is increasing social polarization between mostly those who want to push for a harder solution, a sort of patriotic solution for Ukraine, and the others who are ready to make kind of compromises with the Kremlin. Third, the armed conflict has a large impact on Ukrainian society. For instance, with the presence of about 1.4 million internally displaced people, or IDPs, who are still suffering from issues related to equality of access, treatment of pension, for instance, or a prevalence of mental health issues because they are lacking mental health support. There is about 360,000 veterans, and these people also have a prevalence of substance abuse, for instance, but also equality of access and reintegration inside society.
Successful reforms in Ukraine has always been decentralization, and exactly decentralized systems are best to deal with complexity such as COVID, such as Russian aggression. And if Ukrainian communities are working on one hand closer to people, but in a concerted, coordinated effort driven by Kiev, they could have fast access to information and they could deliver services to Ukrainians even under so much pressure.
If we want a safe and inclusive reintegration of the separatist territories of Donbass, then this reintegration must not be just about the territories, but also about the people. A human-centered approach can only work if a conversation starts with everyone on board in Ukraine: citizens, community-based organizations, NGOs, and the wider civil society, but also businesses, politicians, and thought leaders across Ukraine. Overall, beyond conflict settlement, there is a wider need to increase the level of activism in civil society by Ukrainians.
So Ukraine has been this laboratory of different active measures that Russia deployed to, in a way, undermine its nascent democracy. What the West can learn from Ukraine is the importance of understanding its vulnerabilities. Knowing where your weaknesses are helps you to address. Second, democracy needs protection. Even consolidated democracies in the West suffer from polarization, from lack of critical thinking. And finally, Russia tries to influence systems through money, through money laundering and buying influence through politicians, through institutions. And it's very important that this root of influence, such as corruption, is addressed both in Ukraine and in the West.